What is a placenta?
Behind every healthy baby is a healthy placenta. When you have a normal pregnancy and there are no problems and a healthy baby and a healthy mom, that's a miracle. I'm going to reduce obstetrics down to 3 words: in or out. I was being asked, why did these stillbirths occur? The first one, there was a very small placenta. I said, okay, that's the reason of the stillbirth. And of course, the doctors don't measure the placenta, so how would they know? I didn't think about it. The next case, and a stillbirth, again, a small placenta. Again, I said, whoa, well, the doctors don't measure the placenta. And the third time, at that point, I said, wait a minute, why aren't they measuring the placenta? This is while I was at Yale. I went to the maternal fetal medicine division. I said, yo, why aren't you looking at the placenta? EPV, it takes 30 seconds to do it. It's very simple. It's very reliable. I now have the answer. So why don't you start measuring the placenta? I felt like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. 7,000 babies a year die because of small placentas. As long as we're not doing EPV, we still continue to lose 7,000 babies a year due to this problem. I don't know what they think, that there's this magic thing that's happening called the placenta that we don't have to think about, that magically does what it's supposed to do. Your daughter's placenta was at the 0.0199. She was at the 35th percentile. Her placenta needed to be at the same percentile. Normal is 1 to 1. Hers was, you ready? 1,757 to 1. I still have lots of cases just like yours, sadly. Clearly, what is happening now in standard practice is not adequate to prevent these stillbirths.
Hello and welcome to the Leisure Room. This is the 5th episode in our Racing Awareness campaign. I am your host, Hannes.
And I'm Celeste.
Correct.
Thank you.
We made the news. Has anybody seen it?
Yes, we made the news.
What are you laughing?
Just a quick transition. Yeah, we made news.
That's how my brain works. So we were on Spectrum News 1.
Yes, throughout the state of North Carolina, it aired for full 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And we were really excited when we got the news the morning it aired that Spectrum National picked up our story.
Yeah, the reporter came to the house and filmed us for an hour and a half. Cut out 6 minutes, not even, because Dr. Kliman was also in there.
Yeah, and the reporter, Sydney, she was here for an hour and a half, recorded. Also interviewed Dr. Kliman, and on the segment too was a conversation with her and a couple other reporters. So all of that put down into 6.5 minutes, I think it was, but it was beautifully done. The way that she just told the story, it was great.
Oh, really impressive. So, national airing will be sometime in the future.
Yeah, just another way to get the word out there. It was really exciting. She came to us and asked if she could, interview us.
Yep.
It was a lot of fun.
A fun morning.
It was. On another note, how have you been doing lately?
I have been doing fine, I think. Thank you for asking. It's been, 8 months now?
Almost, yeah.
Yep, 8 months for Ellery. I can tell that the winter depression has faded because it's now the end of April, and with it being more green outside, light for much longer, I can be in the garden.
Yeah.
I don't have to dress and bundle up for running, and overall, people are more happy and outside. I guess that helps in the day-to-day mental state.
Sure does.
So I'm fine. I have been fine. There were a few tough moments the last couple of weeks.
Want to tell us about those moments?
But yeah, a specific song from the 3 Days Grace that hit me close to the heart. when I heard it for the first time, or at least I probably heard it before, but the first time it was like, oh yeah, this is what it means, when it becomes something. So that was tough, and then just every now and then when I have a moment thinking about the Belgian marathon and how to organize that, those anticipations give me some, tough moments sometimes
Yeah.
because I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
There's that similarity or like overlap.
Yeah. So how do you feel like you are coping with the grief from father's perspective?
Hmm. Well, that is a question that does not often get asked. If I may rant for a minute or five. Yeah, so how am I doing from a father's perspective? Um, I will honestly say, and everything that I will say is honest, I feel forgotten for almost all the time. The you, we actually posted the birth announcement in theme or even in conjunction with Say Their Name Day, which I believe is for all stillborn
It's
kitties.
for the pregnancy loss, infant loss, child loss. It's really just a day where you are encouraged to say that person's name that was lost to help reduce the stigma and in remembrance of them.
And so part of that post was that I talked about how somebody at the last marathon in Nashville came up to me and like, "Hey, are you Ellery's dad?" And I think I said it last month in the last podcast too. I have never been asked that question, so he had to repeat it because I'm not used to it. And obviously, the other way around, you are Ellery's mom much more often than I am Ellery's dad, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
It's really annoying. It's really, it's one of those things in society, I guess. Is it because I'm a male? Is it because I'm overlooked because we don't have emotions? Is it because I'm a dad and I haven't carried the child? But to me, all those reasons are double up because I have never been able to carry Ellery. I've only had her in my arms physically for 10 hours and then I put her physically in a coffin. Whereas the mommy, she carried her for 9 months, had all the joy, anticipation, physical, well, I guess anticipation. I could literally feel her. In that sense, I would have rather endured pregnancy and with all the hiccups it comes with, body aches, uncomfortableness and whatnot. I cannot even imagine.
Heartburn, peeing yourself.
You name it. I'd rather go through that and have that same satisfaction and enjoyment, but no. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry for you, Hannes, but the mom. And I'm like,
Yeah.
have you?
Yeah, I feel like when people even do acknowledge you as the grieving dad, it's always "but,"
Yeah.
and then it goes to me, and I'm like, "Wait, what do you mean but?" But that post, the birth announcement was written from your perspective of being asked, "Are you Ellery's dad?"
The reason I brought it up is because 95% of the reactions are, oh, I'm so sorry, mommy.
Yeah. Which I was like, "What?" Uh, and I know that they read the description by their response, because if you just look at the photo, it's a normal birth announcement, so these people are reading the description, and yet still everyone they're like, not a single person said, "I'm so sorry, dad," even though it was from your perspective, and so that was frustrating for me to, like, scroll through the comments and see, like, "I'm so sorry for your loss, mama." Like, that's, unfortunate. It's not just my loss. It's your loss too. And I think that's a common theme though, it's not just from this post, it's from other posts. Always say mom or mama,
Mhm.
and I'm like, "What about the dad?" sad.
Yeah, and I think the next part of my rant then could be I have been part of these grieving classes, and they were specifically well, one of them was specifically for stillbirth, the other one was specifically for male grieving in general. And I do have to admit, it is much more fun to join the male one because there is a different kind of grief.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of acceptance and a different kind of going by. It's almost, I can almost say it's almost less emotional. Male and female innately have a different view on stuff, mentally different and mentally wired differently. Nothing wrong with it, just different. And in the one for infant loss, the host was so emotional. It was almost annoying because he was almost carrying more emotions than I was carrying at that point or carrying at that point.
The one that we did together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for some people it works. Everyone grieves differently. Those classes are also not for me because they're very much and we've done them together, I've done them on my own. They're very much not my thing because they are very emotional, down, sad, depressing, and it just pulls me down into that depression and sadness even more when, yes, it's a sad, devastating loss, but I also want to be thankful for the positive times that we had and not just let the loss just overshadow everything because it was a great pregnancy and we have great memories of it. And
And
so,
we finished the story positively in the hospital.
yeah, we had a great birth experience even after finding out the news. So, yeah, everyone does it differently, but the support groups, not my thing.
We were in Phoenix 2 months ago, and I wanted to get to know the Sad Dads Club,
Yeah,
but with everything happening that week, we didn't end up communicating. So maybe we should reach out again.
yeah.
Yeah.
You don't see those kind of groups often where
No,
it's just dads.
just the dads. No,
And just in general, in the stillbirth community, when you see people out there advocating, it is almost always the mom.
no.
Uh,
They get the most views, likes, and shares.
yeah, I don't know if it's just yeah, I don't know what it is. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, all I'm saying is I don't feel, guess, accepted. And people can say, "Oh, oh, but you're this and that, and whatever societal stigma you wanna stick on my chest." But I am speaking from the heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's my daughter, also your daughter, you know? It's our daughter, so that's like I mean, it's good for me to see you being left out.
All right, let's close up the rant. Let's move on to something more positive.
Onward to, the marathon,
Yeah, the recent experience of the Foot Levelers Blue Ridge Marathon.
America's toughest road race.
Yes, and I can assure you it is a beast.
You did great though.
Um,
Way better than expected.
yes, I did. The reason why I'm so flabbergasted is because overdid myself. I was not expecting to do it the way I did. I finished sub 4 hours at an amazing time of 3 hours 55 minutes, knowing that before going up the first hill and Roanoke Mountain, I dropped off my backpack, forgot my phone, so I had to run back. So I did an extra 200 meters extra. And then on the way down again back to Mills Mountain, I dropped my phone and I dropped the shoe. Well, one of the tiny shoes, but the one on my foot.
Yeah. One of Mallory's shoes.
Yes. So I had a few little hiccups. It still has a 4. And obviously the last 2 miles, my muscles, my calves, and my groin started to cramp up and all that kind of stuff, or wanting to, and had to fight against those. So despite all that, still sub 4. on 7,400 feet elevation gain and drop.
Crazy.
Yeah, I think I know how to do the marathon by now.
I mean, I feel like any marathon after that one is gonna feel like a breeze.
You say that. But yeah, I love the course. I loved Roanoke. It was beautiful. It was a huge variety of terrain. I mean, it's all paved, but it's Blue Ridge Parkway, it's mountains, like steep hills. You go up, you go around neighborhoods. It was just beautiful, and lots of people cheering you on, and it was fun. That's what I start to like about marathons, even though it's physically an experience in the lightest way explained possible. But it's just fun. The last half a mile, there's so many people leading up to the finish line, and it's like, all right, just did 26 miles. Let's sprint. Um, or at least in my head, it it looks like sprinting. I don't know what it looks to other people when I'm going through all the physical hiccups that I am at that point. But yeah, it's it's a long run with a lot of cheering on, and as long as you're physically capable of keeping up, I enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to the next one already next week.
Yeah.
Yep. So the next one is in Durham. This weekend.
Well, the day this podcast comes out, yeah.
So there's not much to ask you guys to come out for that one because
It's already happening.
we'll do this.
Oh, that's nice because it's local. We're no travel for this.
Yep.
It's, I mean, what, 50 minutes from our house.
So yeah, let's stay physically fit and let's continue this year as we are doing collecting medals on the wall.
Yeah.
How was your OB clinic round on Thursday? Any?
Uneventful overall. There weren't many clinics that I went to because Roanoke is a small town. There were
Yeah.
4, I believe, and one of them, their doors were locked, so I didn't even get to go in and talk with them. But the 3rd or 4th one that I went to, I was dropping off information, or, like, they always tell me, like, "Drop it off," but then they had taken it back and had told me, like, they'll bring a card back, and then they came back and they were like, "Oh, actually, she just wants to talk to you as a clinical manager who does ultrasounds," and so she's like, "Tell me about this," and I asked the first question was like, "Well, do you know what EPV is?" And she said, "No," and
So
so
clinical manager that does ultrasounds. So high level ultrasound person does not know how to do an ultrasound on a placenta.
not measurements.
I mean, it's kind of what you do with the ultrasound.
I mean, yeah, when you do you ultrasound the placenta, but in terms of knowing the measurements or knowing how to do measurements, she didn't even know that was a thing that you could do.
I think that lies the issue.
Yeah, but she was very interested, and I told her there was training involved or training available, through Yale and Dr. Kliman. I had also taken some cards from Push for Empowered Pregnancy for accredited training. I had those this was the first time I had those, so I would kinda throw that in there when I would go to these clinics and be like, "I have accredited training opportunities for the providers. Can I talk to them?"
Yep.
So I think that was also a highlight. There's 2 they do. They have one for stillbirth prevention and then another for, taking care of patients' pregnancy after loss. And so both great trainings. But yeah, she's very interested specifically in the EPV. But I gave her all the information, gave her extras, and she said she'd follow up with me. So hopefully, as of yet, no word. But she was going to talk to the providers there. She said she thinks she had a couple there at the clinic who were going to be interested. And so I've got my fingers crossed that maybe something more will come from this, and that maybe that this will become a clinic that does EPV.
Awesome. All right. I believe it's now time to introduce our most esteemed guest. He is a research scientist at Yale University School of Medicine. He's a director of the Reproductive and Placental Health Unit. He is the spokesperson about placentas. He has studied over 50,000 placentas in his career. So if there's anybody more versed to answer all our medical and social questions about placentas and integration in the medical field, then I believe there's no one better than Dr. Harvey Kliman.
Thank you, Dr. Kleiman, so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking your time today to talk with us about placentas. Just to get started, I think we should start with the basics. One thing that you do, I've noticed in your emails, is you sign it by saying behind every healthy pregnancy is a healthy placenta. So, just for everybody listening, what is a placenta?
Okay. And just not to start off with correcting you too much, but it's behind every healthy baby is a healthy placenta.
Yes, thank
There you
you.
go.
Yeah.
There you go.
And of course, having a healthy baby is a healthy pregnancy. So they all do go together. So the placenta is actually ignored by most people. I mean, obviously, everybody's waiting for the baby to come out, right? And that's what the whole pregnancy, the anticipation of it is. But behind that baby is its placenta. And it is not mom's placenta, but it's the baby's placenta. And basically, you can think of it in very simple terms as the placenta is the root system of the tree. So if you look outside and you happen to, and I see a whole bunch of trees outside where I am now, there's a root system underneath the ground that's as big as that tree is above the ground. And that tree would not exist, could not survive, could not grow, could not be a large tree without that large root system. And the same thing with the fetus. The fetus depends 100%, not 99%, not 99.9%, but 100% on its placenta, because that's the only way that the fetus inside of the uterus can survive, because there is no other way to get oxygen, to get nutrients, but through the placenta, through basically the root system. An analogy I like to give my students and patients is you can think of the placenta as taking your hand and putting it into a bucket of water and wiggling your fingers around. And the water around those fingers is mom's blood. The bucket is the placenta, the fingers are the placenta, and basically mom's blood is like the water circulating around. And this upper arm is the umbilical cord, and I'm the fetus. So that's the relationship between the fetus and its placenta. And clearly, if the placenta is not working right, that will be a serious problem for the fetus.
So I've been looking forward to this call for a very long time because I have a science background as well, although I don't practice it as much. But back in the day, I did science mathematics in class. And I do remember vividly the pregnancy class in biology. And so I would like to do a quick deep dive on the genetics and the biology of a placenta. So I think for starters, let's go very wide here. Do only mammals have placentas?
So that's an interesting question. All mammals have placenta, certainly, but I'm trying to go back in terms of species. So are dolphins mammals, do you think? Well, do they feed their young? That's a good question. They have placentas. Whales have placentas. So you could think of it this way. And since you're going really far back, let's go back. Life evolved in the ocean.
hmm
It was very easy to reproduce in the ocean. Uh, a female would drop her eggs, a male would drop the sperm. They would come together. You'd have little embryos developing in the ocean, and the ocean was the source of nutrients for this little embryo. When animals came on land, because it got too dangerous for some of them to be in the ocean, it's a very dangerous place, they start to get on land. Yeah, they did an intermediate step of sort of digging some holes and putting an egg, think of sea turtles, right, in the sand. So, okay, the eggs are now safe. They're not lying at the bottom of the ocean for everything to eat. And then the little turtles can pop out and go back in the ocean. But at some point, evolution, sort of developed another solution, which was take the ocean and bring it to land. In other words, literally bring the ocean and bring it into the land. And that's what internal reproduction is. So all animals that reproduce on land have, in essence, reproduced the ocean inside of them. So
Oh,
when
wow.
you think of our pregnancy, kind of cool to think about, really. Our pregnancy is, of course, embryo and a fetus floating in amniotic fluid. That's the ocean. That's the recapitulation of the ocean. And of course, to survive inside of this fluid filled space inside of the mother's body, you need to have an organ that connects that embryo and fetus to the mother's nutrients, and that's the placenta. Now, the placenta is quite different in different organisms. Well, let's compare mice to humans. Of mice and man, for example, we'll just do that for a minute. A mouse only has a pregnancy for 21 days, and the placenta just sort of rests on the uterus. And there is exchange of nutrients from the mother's uterus here into the placenta, but there isn't really direct contact between the two. It's pretty superficial. For our pregnancy, which lasts 9 months, that's a completely different investment. We have the largest babies of any organism compared to our final size of any organism on the planet. We have the largest brains of any organism compared to any other organism in terms of the final size. So, does that exist in our species? It's the placenta. The placenta has basically been optimized in our species to be able to support a fetus to grow it to a huge size, to grow the brain to a huge size. And it does that by very aggressively sucking out all the nutrients it possibly can from the mother. We'll talk about, you mentioned the evolutionary basis of it, but interesting from a genetic point of view, the placenta is made by the genes of the father.
That's what I was getting to. Yeah. If the placenta is, like you said, from the father, then the next pregnancy that we will go through is a completely different set of genes, a completely different risk factor for a placental issue. Am I correct in that statement?
Yes, and let's talk about the randomness of that for a second. This is kind of mind blowing when you think of that genetic that just for a minute. So, a female makes all of her eggs when she's a 20-week fetus, and there are 2 million of them. And then
Right.
when she's born, there are only about 100,000. They get really lost.
So she's born. She's not even fertile. Yeah.
And then in her entire life, she only uses about 400 of those. So the question is, in a particular pregnancy, that's one oocyte out of a beginning of 2 million. All right, so those are the odds, 1 out of 2 million. That's pretty impressive, but that's nothing compared to the male, to the sperm now. So in a single ejaculation in a normal sexual intercourse event, there are 300 million sperm. That's a lot.
Dang.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's kind of overwhelming. That's typical of men. That's kinda like mansplaining, they sort of overwhelm the female there. So, basically, we have 300 million sperm, but half of them die immediately. It's kind of a sad life. They die, chip, bang, as soon as they come out. Then some of them are lucky enough to get through the cervix, and then they get to the uterus, and they go through one or the other of the fallopian tube, but how many sperm actually make it to the egg? Well, this is mind-blowing. Only about 20.
Wow.
20. And you don't want more than 20 because you have to make sure that in the egg, only one sperm goes into that egg. If two sperm come in, now we have three sets of chromosomes. That's called a triploid pregnancy. That's not good. That will not be a normal, obviously, person. So nature has designed it, talk about selection and randomness of genetics. You start off with 300 million sperm and only one make it to the egg, right? That's pretty low odds. Obviously, that's never going to repeat again in the infinite history of the universe, right? We're not going to have another sperm like that hitting an egg that was 1 out of 2 million. The sperm that I feel the most bad for, though, are the sperm that go in the wrong fallopian tube, the last 20, but they just took the wrong turn at the very end. That's kind of a bummer for them, but that's the way nature designed it, right? As I said to my Yale students when I teach them this, yes, I'm impressed that you're a Yale undergraduate and you went through a lot of odds, but the real odds, the thing that's really the miracle, is your existence. That's what the miracle is.
That's crazy. I never really thought about it that way.
I do remember those.
If you're saying the genetics of the placenta come from dad, if there is a placental abnormality, is it, I guess, then dad that needs to be tested and checked?
Hmm. So that's a good question. So let me dwell into the genetics a little bit and sort of expand on that because I don't want to leave people with the wrong impression. What we're saying when we say it's the genetics of the dad is that if you just and these we learn these things, by the way, in what are called experiments of nature. So there are situations where an empty egg that doesn't have a nucleus is fertilized by a single sperm. And this only works if it's an X sperm. So each sperm is 23 chromosomes, either X or Y. So if a 23 chromosome X sperm goes into one of these empty eggs without a nucleus in it, it duplicates, and now we have 46XX, which is what the chromosomes are for a female. And you might think that, well, it just becomes a normal female. No, that actually only becomes a placenta. Now, it's not a normal placenta, it's a very abnormal placenta, but it's a placenta. And the converse experiment of nature also happens to females. Occasionally, the oocytes, the eggs in her ovary, which are always 23X, spontaneously duplicate the chromosome to be 46XX. This happens to 20 something year olds typically. They'll wake up with some pain. They'll have an ultrasound. They'll see a cyst in their ovary, and they have what's called a dermoid cyst, is sort of the general name for it. And what happens there is you get this extremely abnormal growth of tissue, but it's only embryonic tissue. You get hair, skin, bone, thyroid, things like that. And if anybody is listening to this, if you just Google dermoid cyst, only do this if you can deal with things that look kind of gross, I would say, quote unquote. But this is medical. And what it teaches us is that the mother's genes make the embryo and the fetus and the baby, the father's the placenta. But to get a normal baby and normal placenta, you need both together, right? You can't have one or the other. But the father in general, going back to evolution, is trying to make the biggest baby possible. And he does that by a lot of techniques and tricks, which we can talk about. We can talk about the invasive trophoblasts and the blood flow to the placenta. I think that's important for people to understand. But mom has a completely different goal in pregnancy, and her goal is not to die. That's what she's trying to achieve. So mom is constantly trying to make the placenta a little smaller so she doesn't get overwhelmed by the pregnancy, and dad is trying to make it bigger. But as in any relationship and a successful marriage, marriage is a compromise between these two forces, right? And so a normal, healthy pregnancy is the outcome of both of those forces sort of compromising in the middle. The biggest baby possible without hurting the mother.
And so that both ties into the baby itself, but also the placenta, then, I assume. The biggest placenta possible, the biggest baby possible.
Yeah, exactly. So, the more nutrients that the placenta can get, the bigger the baby can get. So, as I said, the mouse placenta is very simple. It just rests on the uterus. We have the most aggressive placentas in all species. There is a group of cells that actually leave the placenta and find the maternal blood vessels that are fountaining blood. Go back to the bucket analogy. Think of the water in the bucket as coming from a sprinkler system at the bottom of the bucket. That's mom sending her blood into the placenta, just like a sprinkler system. And dad sends these cells down into the uterus, actually invades into the mother's uterus, finds those blood vessels and opens up those blood vessels. So it turns out that opening up those blood vessels is what allows our species to have the most maternal blood flow to our placentas of any organism on the planet.
And so then the next question that I might have then is, so since the genes come from the dad, is there different with every sperm cell? Or is it just my DNA is built up this way? So this is going to be, in our case, the next pregnancy, another small placenta? Or is it the case that those genes get mixed up every time and the outcome is random?
It's the latter. So, every pregnancy is unique. And I have a lot of families who have multiple pregnancy losses, and obviously that's very upsetting and very difficult for them. But I try to reassure them and say, look, the highest recurrence risk can be 50%. And they say, well, we've had 3 losses in a row. That doesn't seem reasonable. How is that possible? And I say, well, look, if you take a coin take a quarter, let's say, and flip it 100 times and keep a record of the heads and tails, and let's say a head is a successful pregnancy and a tail is a loss, you will see sometimes 7 tails in a row. You'll see 5 heads in a row. In other words, it isn't head, tail, head, tail, head, tail. That's not what happens. So even if something is a 50% recurrence risk, you can have families that have multiple successful pregnancies and then one loss. You can have multiple losses and then a success. So typically, I do see for families that have some genetic component to their pregnancy losses, the highest risk can be 50%. Sometimes genetic losses are what are called sporadic, which means that it has nothing to do with the parents. They don't carry anything in them, and just something went wrong in that particular pregnancy, which has a very low chance of happening again. So until somebody has more than one pregnancy, we don't know which category they're in.
So, when you are looking at the placentas, what are you looking for that will indicate genetic abnormalities?
Let me pull back a little bit and maybe sort of give an overview of the things that I see in pregnancy loss in general. And
Okay.
when you say pregnancy loss in general, you have to be kind of cognizant of the gestational age. So, for example, in the first and second trimester, the vast majority of those losses are genetic, and most of them occur in the first trimester. And in our country, there are 5 million pregnancies a year, 4 million deliveries, and 1 million pregnancy losses. 1 million. That's a big number. That's 20%. So 20% of all women will have a pregnancy loss. And because 20% of all pregnancies end up in a loss, and most of them are quite early, they can be at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks, let's say. But they do sort of go also into the second trimester. And the vast majority, over 90% of those, are genetic. They can be either chromosomally genetic. What does that mean? We carry a set of chromosomes in our body. A male is 46XY, a female is 46XX. People who are thinking about pregnancy or have been tested during pregnancy know that we can test for what's called trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome. We can test for trisomy 18. We can test for trisomy 13, for example. That's what non invasive prenatal testing does. It's a blood test that allows us to test for those things. Why do we test for those trisomies? There are trisomies of every chromosome. The trisomies of the other chromosomes, which means a trisomy is having 3 number ones, 3 number twos, 3 number sevens, 3 number 16s, is that those are so lethal that the pregnancies end in the first week or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And sometimes the woman doesn't even know she's pregnant. But trisomy 13, 18, and 21 produces babies that can be born. And so that's why we test for them, because those are the most likely to actually be carried to term. And for families that want that information to make decisions about whether they want to continue a pregnancy or not with such a chromosomally abnormal pregnancy, that's why we do that testing. But that's a small fraction of the pregnancy losses. Certainly that's, one of the reasons. The other big reason is that there's something wrong in the genetics of the pregnancy, not the chromosomes. What do I mean by that? Each chromosome is actually hypercoiled DNA. And how many DNA codes are there in our genome? There are 6 billion with a B. 6 billion. That's a big number. And we do not test for that in prenatal testing. We don't test the 6 billion.
Good luck with that. 6 billion.
It is a huge number and it's a problem. And it's actually worse than that because only 1% of the 6 billion actually code for things that we know about. The other 99%, when I was a medical student quite a while ago, they taught us that that was junk DNA, which of course is wrong. It's it's actually as important, if not more important than the other DNA. It is the regulatory DNA that controls the 1%. And so only recently, for example, at Yale and other institutions, are we doing whole genomic sequencing for families that have recurrent pregnancy loss to see if we can find the genetic reason for these losses. So I think it's important for people to understand that even if you have a normal non-invasive prenatal testing, even if you're doing IVF, for example, and have pre-implantation genetic testing and your embryo doesn't have any chromosomal abnormalities, you can still have a genetic abnormality in that pregnancy. And that's another reason for pregnancy losses. So, to go back to your original question, what do I look for? So, the first and second trimester mostly are what I see when I look at those placentas are trophoblast inclusions. Those are abnormal folds in the placenta that are a marker, like a check engine light, to simply say there's something genetically abnormal. It could be a chromosomal problem, it could be a genetic problem. When you get into the third trimester, the reasons for loss change. And the number one reason for a stillbirth, and that's defined usually as 20 weeks or beyond, I like to just consider it in the third trimester. That's actually, I think, the most logical thing to think about a stillbirth is a third trimester pregnancy loss. The most common is a reason for that is a small placenta. 36% of stillbirths in the third trimester are due to small placentas, very small placentas.
Just small. Nothing genetic, nothing connection-wise, just size.
That's a good question. Everything in science is broken down into layers. So it's like
Right.
peeling an onion here. So the first thing is just the big causes. The first big cause is a small placenta. I will talk in just a minute about the reasons for a small placenta, but let's hold off on that for a second. The next most common is a cord accident. Now, a small placenta, we're going to talk about the logic of that and why people don't look at placentas and why we missed it. And I think that's important to talk about in this conversation. But I just want to go through the different reasons. The second most common is a cord accident. That's very tragic because the placenta, the whole pregnancy is normal, except for at the very end of the pregnancy, there's some accident where there's a knot in the cord is wrapped around the neck of the fetus, or there's a kink in the cord. That's all of a sudden, it's very difficult to diagnose ahead of time. All these things are tragedies, of course. That is just a tragedy because there's really not a good way to diagnose that. It's not impossible, but not a good way. Then there are infections. You can have a separation of the placenta. You can have a bleed in the placenta where, remember the fingers in the bucket of water? Imagine one of my fingers is bleeding and all my blood is being lost through my finger. That can happen. So the most common is a small placenta. And now to answer your good question, why are placentas small? Well, there are only three reasons. Most common, the main reason is a genetic abnormality. And that's why you can see trophoblast inclusions in small placentas, just like in the first trimester and second trimester losses. It's basically saying that there's something genetically at the foundation of this small placenta. And then the second most common cause is, remember the sprinkler system in the bucket of water I said before? There's something wrong with those blood vessels. There's not enough maternal blood getting into the placenta. The third most common is that there's something wrong with the immunologic balance between the mother and the placenta. Remember, the placenta is not the mother. The placenta is a mixture of dad and mom. So from mom's point of view, the placenta is foreign. And internal reproduction is kind of cool because we don't get killed in the ocean, right? That's a benefit. But the problem, the universal problem of internal reproduction is you have foreign tissue inside of a mother. How do you prevent the mother's immune system from recognizing this and rejecting the placenta? So that happens maybe 5 to 10% of the time. So those are the three main reasons for a small placenta.
And so the placenta carries both of our DNAs. It's like, yeah, it's completely foreign DNA. You have the baby growing as a combination of our DNA, and then you have the placenta, like a complete separate organ, separate from the baby that does its own thing.
Right, but the genetics of the placenta, just to remind you, are the same. They are the same exact genetics between the two of them. The placenta starts at day 5 after fertilization. So it starts right away. I mean, basically, you've got a single egg, you have a sperm, now we have a single embryo. It divides into 2, 4, 8, and then at day 5, looks like a tennis ball. It's sort of a sphere, it's hollow inside. It has a little clump here, which is going to become the embryo, and the whole outer shell of this tennis ball is the placenta. So it starts at day 5. And it's the same. genetic material as the embryo and the fetus and the baby.
Which is even more crazy to think of because it's the same cells. They just specify in becoming, well, just the placenta, and the rest becomes an entire human being.
Right. And all this happens within the first 5 days, which is
Right,
kind of
Wow.
right.
amazing. Yeah, that's
It's,
amazing.
it's
So, aside from stillbirth, what other pregnancy complications are small placentas associated with?
That's a great question. So it's kind of goes back to the three reasons that you have a small placenta. So let's talk about the one where there's decreased blood flow. So just to remind everybody, there are these maternal vessels in the uterus that are fountaining her blood into the placenta. There are cells in the placenta that are like soldiers that are leaving the placenta and invading into the uterus, right? They go into the uterus. They're looking for the maternal vessels. They actually attack the wall of those vessels and cause the vessels to open up. And that's what allows the increased blood flow, which allows the fetus to grow, the baby to grow. So that's normal. Well, what happens if those invasive cells don't make it to those blood vessels? What happens if maybe there's something wrong with the cells themselves? Maybe there's something wrong with the connective tissue in the uterus. For example, it's too difficult. You know, I'm just trying to think of an analogy. It's like trying to get through a crowd of people and you just can't get through. It's too many people, so it can't make it. Or sometimes the mother's immune system actually says, you're not me. You're foreign. I'm going to kill you. And literally, the mother kills those cells. So, for whatever reason, if those invasive cells don't make it to the mother's blood vessels, don't open them up, the placenta is not happy because there's not enough blood getting to it. Now, the placenta does not give up easily. It will not tolerate not getting enough blood flow. So, it basically has systems, just like a thermostat. If a room is too cold, the thermostat says, I need to turn the furnace on. And so I'm going to make that room hotter. And the placenta does the same thing with the mother's blood pressure. It says, wow, I'm not getting enough blood. I'm going to make the mother hypertensive. I'm going to increase her blood pressure. So there's a whole class of diseases which is called preeclampsia or gestational hypertension or HELP syndrome in the extreme, and those diseases actually are the third most common cause of maternal death in the world. So if the placenta is left to its own accord, it will actually harm the mother significantly by causing her blood pressure to go up so high that it damages her liver, damages her kidney, can cause a stroke. Yeah, this is all in the name of the success of the pregnancy, right? Not to give it too much emotional weight, but the placenta's job is to make that fetus survive and make it the biggest it can be. And it doesn't really care that much about the mother, right? It's just doing the job that it's supposed to do. So, unfortunately, there are situations where the mother can be harmed by the placenta.
Kind of scary.
if you think about it, yeah.
When you have a normal pregnancy and there are no problems and a healthy baby and a healthy mom, that's what we want to see. But that's a miracle because so many things had to go completely correctly and perfectly to allow that to happen. And only when something, it's always this way, you only appreciate something when it's missing or something goes wrong. You realize, wow, there's so many things that had to have happened. And unfortunately, the one little thing that was necessary in this pregnancy didn't work out. And that can lead to a loss or early miscarriage or a stillbirth. So, yeah, it's of course a terrible tragedy. The thing that upsets me the most about the placenta and placental size and small placentas is that we now have the tool to actually figure out when there's a small placenta, and it's not being used really, adequately, in my opinion. That to me is, I think, the serious problem in this equation.
Why do you think it's being so underused?
That's such an important question and such a big question. There's so many layers to that question. Number one, most people who are trained in obstetrics and maternal fetal medicine are not trained to use placental measurements. To be honest with you, most people taking care of pregnant patients believe that looking at the fetus, even with very high technology methods, is all that's necessary. You don't need to do anything else because that's the end goal of the pregnancy. So you'll hear doctors they are asked this question by my patients, they will say, the doctors say, well, I'm doing everything I can. I'm doing all the prenatal tests that are available and I'm following the growth of, your baby and everything seems to be fine. The problem is they're not looking at the thing that supports the fetus, right? The placenta. I remember having a couple who had a stillbirth similar to yours, a very small placenta, and I explained, why it happened, the small placenta. I explained about estimated placental volume and measuring the placenta. And the husband, who happened to be an airline pilot, after thinking about this for a minute, said, gee, that's crazy. Why aren't they doing that? I'm a pilot. When I have 250 people behind me that their lives are dependent on what I'm doing, I want as much data as possible to make the best decisions. I would want, if I was a doctor, to have all the data available to make the best decisions about a pregnancy too. So I agree with him and I agree with anybody who has that point of view. It's very challenging because, there's so many of my patients, ironically, the fetuses were normal size, even large. And what you'll hear often from a doctor is, well, the fetus is fine. The fetus is a perfectly good size. We don't get worried about a fetus until it's less than the 10th percentile. And my concern is that, wait, the fetus was at the 80th percentile at 20 weeks. Then it was at the 60th percentile. Then it was at the 40th percentile. Then it was at the 20th percentile. Doesn't that concern you that the growth is just flattening out here? And even though it's not less than the 10th percentile, doesn't that sort of set off some alarms? And don't you ask the question, why do you think that might be? And the reason invariably is that the placenta is very small. So I'm not asking placental measurements to take over all of prenatal care. I just want that to be added to the toolbox, just one other piece of data that obstetricians and maternal fetal medicine doctors can use to help make informed decisions. Because ironically, the worst problems happen, the most likely stillbirths occur when you have a large fetus, a large baby, and a small placenta. That's really the most dangerous situation. And that's when the doctors think everything is going perfectly fine.
Yeah, I wanted to make two analogies there when you were bringing up starting at the 80th percentile and then dropping down to 20. If you don't track that data, it's like your kid going from A's to F's and you think that's normal. I mean, I can think that many parents listening to this, when your kid drops to a D, you're gonna talk to your kid.
I agree.
And then going back to your earlier statement, we always check the baby, the fetus, everything else. But if the mom comes in with high blood pressure, then we also start to look what's going on. So the placenta is doing everything it can to support the baby, but if the mom is hurting, we also take care of the vessel that brings that baby to this planet. But then nobody cares to think about the one and only connection between the two that might be doing something as well as a result of what's going on. I think the next step is just complete the connection and look at the placenta.
I agree.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what EPV is exactly and how you came to create this calculation?
Sure. So it takes a while for me to see something, maybe 2 or 3 times, to hit me in the head a couple times. So in the early 2000s, I had 3 cases in a row. I think they were quite near each other of stillbirths that, I was being asked, why did these stillbirths occur? And the first one, I looked and there was a very small placenta. And I said, okay, that's the reason of the stillbirth. And of course, the doctors don't measure the placenta. So how would they know? It's not something that it's their fault because they're not aware of it. I didn't think about it. The next case happened, very similar. Again, a stillbirth, again, a small placenta. Again, I said, whoa, well, the doctors don't measure the placenta, so they weren't aware of this. Then the third time, at that point, I said, wait a minute, this is like 3 times in a row. Why aren't they measuring the placenta? So I've been at Yale for 35 years. So this is while I was at Yale. and I went to the maternal fetal medicine division. And I just want to backtrack about Yale for a minute. Yale's an amazing place. Obstetrical ultrasound was started at Yale, basically. Electronic field monitoring was invented at Yale. This is the first neonatal intensive unit is at Yale. This is the first use of penicillin was at Yale. So, Yale has a long history of amazing record and research and innovation in obstetrics and gynecology and pediatrics and neonatology and everything like that. So, I view this place as the top pinnacle place. So I wondered, I asked them, I said, yo, why aren't you looking at the placenta? And they said, well, it's too hard. I go, what do you mean it's too hard? They go, well, if you do an ultrasound of a circumference or a distance from here to here, biparietal diameter, this is called, or the length of a bone, for example, that's easy. But doing a placenta is very difficult. Why is it so difficult? It's the shape of it. It's like a beanie cap, right? I don't have a beanie cap to put on to show
Well,
you,
you do
but
have a placenta right there, if you
I
wanna
have a
bring it.
stuffed placenta.
oh, cute. Yes. I love. Well, here, this will hopefully this won't be embarrassing on the internet, but here's kind of a placenta beanie cap, right? It's even the right color. You see, it's this, cap-shaped thing. And the problem is it's very hard to measure the volume of this thing, right? I mean, it has a diameter, it has a height, and it has sort of a thickness. It's not that thick, really. The question is, because of the shape of it being that way, it's hard to measure. Now, I'm not asking for sympathy here in what I'm going to tell you now, but my father, super smart engineer, amazing person. He actually made the computers in the Voyager 1 and 2 space probes just to show you how smart he was. He never played ball with me. He only gave me math problems when I was growing up. So that was his way of interacting with me, which I enjoy. I love math. That was fun. Um, so I called him up one day and I said, Dad, you've given me math problems all my life. I now have a math problem for you. I've got I got the spherical cap, and if I cut through it and make sort of a crescent shaped thing, and I only give you the measurement of from this point to this point, which is the width. You think of this as a beanie cap that you've cut down the middle. Now it's resting on the table. I only give you the width measurement, the height measurement. Here, let's see, like that. And then the thickness measurement of this, beanie cap that I've cut through. What is the equation to describe the three-dimensional geometric spherical cap that shape is? So he made the equation for me. I said, "Oh, that's great." Well, we had to prove that that equation actually worked. So one of our fellows here, maternal fetal medicine in the late 2000s, I gave him this project, or I basically said, "I have a project for you. Are you interested?" And name was Umberto, and he said, "Sure, that sounds kind of cool." So he was very adept at doing this, and this was a big ask. We would ask women 6 hours before they were gonna deliver, like, right in the end of their labor and delivery in the hospital, "Could we do an ultrasound on them before they deliver their baby?" And luckily, quite a few of them agreed. We did this ultrasound. Did the cross section, the view of the, placenta. We made the measurements. Then the woman delivered, and then the baby came out, of course, the placenta came out. We immediately clamped the cord, we cut off the membranes, we cut off the rest of the umbilical cord, and we weighed the placenta. And we just had a simple question. Did the volume that we measured by that, ultrasound equal the weight? And it was extremely close. So we said, wow, this equation actually works. I called up my dad. I said, Dad, good job with that equation. It works. And I was honored because he's a co-author on the paper. And that's kind of cool to publish a paper with your dad as a co-author. So that was fun. I thought we were done. I thought, okay, I went back to my colleagues. I said, okay, your problem was you didn't have a way to measure the placenta. I now have the answer. So why don't you start measuring the placenta? And they said, well, hold on. What's normal? What's the 90th percentile? What's the 10th percentile? What's the 50th? How do I know if I do a measurement that what it is? I said, oh, you're right. Okay. So we spent years collecting data, what's called normative data, which was, ultrasounds on every woman who came into the hospitals at Cornell University, Yale, and in Norway, we did this study. We did this study in Africa. We did it on thousands of patients. And we develop what are called normative curves. And now we know what is the 90th percentile, the 10th percentile, and the 50th percentile, and all the percentiles in between, above and below. So now we have that equation. And so we can take any placenta at any gestational age and we can tell if it's small, normal, or large, for example. So I went back to my colleagues. I said, okay, we did the normative curves. I felt like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. I was saying to the wizard, okay, I want to go back to Kansas. And the wizard said, well, of course, he couldn't send me back to Kansas, right? He's actually not able to do it. He doesn't have the ability. So in order to get rid of me, he said, okay, why don't you get the broomstick? When you get the broomstick of the witch and come back, and then I'll send you to Kansas. So that's what I've been feeling like is Dorothy on these adventures to keep on getting information from them. And we are now at the point where, since we know the equation works, we have the normative curves, of course. It's very easy to do an EPV. It takes 30 seconds to do it. It's very simple. It's very reliable. Now the ask is, okay, you have to prove that it will prevent a stillbirth. And that's actually a very hard thing to prove. Because if you do an EPV on a pregnant patient and you find out that there's a small placenta and you then say, okay, I think you should deliver this patient to save the baby's life, the response is, well, you don't know if it would have died. You don't know if it would have really been a stillbirth. And so that's a problem. So we are now have developed a study. It's a blinded study where we will prospectively do ultrasounds on all pregnant patients who come to Yale. We will collect the data, but not reveal it to anybody. We will just store the data, and then we will wait for all the patients to deliver their babies, and whatever the outcome is the outcome. We feel ethically that we're not doing anything, either good or bad. We're just letting nature follow its course. I'm sad to feel, to understand that there will be stillbirths in that population. But even if we don't do the study, there will be the same stillbirths. So we need to do something to collect data to prove to people that this will actually change clinical practice. So that's the next, hopefully the last phase of this proving to people that this is a worthy method to use in clinical practice. But it's been a long journey. I mean, it's been, well, probably about 20 years since I first even had the idea for it. So that's a long time to wait for something to happen. If anybody's listening would like to fund this study, please send me an email at harvey.kliman@yale.edu. That's what we need now. We need funding for this study. That's what we need.
I don't know anybody's placenta that has been measured. So any of our friends that delivered a healthy baby, nobody's placenta was measured. Ours was measured. I think it was standard practice at the hospital that we delivered to do so. So I guess my point and my question is, could the study be that you don't track it before, but you track it when it happens, and then make a correlation between, okay, this is the discrepancy between size baby, size placenta, and all of these have the same discrepancy, hence correlation or causation.
Let me see if I understand your suggestion is to find a patient who's had a stillbirth, but she hasn't delivered yet. Is that what you're saying?
No, so the person delivers has had a stillbirth, and when that happened, tragically, you do measure the placenta, you measure the baby.
People have done that study many times, and people know that the number one cause of stillbirth is a small placenta. I mean, that's known.
And that's not sufficient enough to prove it? No? Okay.
No, right. That's been known for decades. There's no question about that. And there's a stillbirth cooperative study that was done for many years. There have been all sorts of studies that have shown that small placentas by itself are a significant cause of stillbirth, and it is still the number one cause of stillbirth in many studies. The problem is doing it prospectively during pregnancy, right? This is what the challenge is. Even though yes, I mean, it seems obvious to me, but I'm in the middle of this, right? It
Right.
seems
Yeah.
obvious to me that, yes, of course, you would want to measure these placentas. But again, to go back to the original question here, um, is that why aren't doctors using it? Because they are following the fetus. and they feel that following the fetus is adequate to follow the pregnancy, right? And they look at a lot of things. They look at the fetal growth, the amniotic fluid index. There's something called a biophysical profile. You can do what's called umbilical artery Doppler. So there are a lot of tools that, maternal fetal medicine doctors use. They feel that these are sufficient to prevent stillbirth. And maybe they do in some cases. All I can say is I'm still very busy with lots of patients who've had stillbirths. And that morning, they had a normal non stress test, which is electronic fetal monitoring. And that morning, everybody thought that the fetus was perfectly fine. The size of the fetus was fine. So obviously that's not true, right? I would not have any more cases of stillbirth coming to me in the third trimester due to small placentas if things were being done out there completely correctly for these patients. And I still have lots of cases just like yours, sadly. So clearly, what is happening now in standard practice is not adequate to prevent these stillbirths.
So then what would your recommendation be if during a pregnancy they did measure the placenta and found that it was growing too small? What is your recommendation from that point on?
So that's a great question. And let me just give a general answer that we do in medicine for all situations like this. We call it risk stratification. And I'm just going to give an analogy. Probably many people listening to this are not of the age yet where they need to worry about their colons. But I will, just as a separate public announcement to anybody listening to this, colon cancer rates are increasing, and younger people, especially women, are getting colon cancer, even in their early 40s. So when I was your age, you had to be 65 for the first colonoscopy, then 55, then 40. Now, maybe it's going to be 40. It's 45 now, I think. So what happens when you have a colonoscopy? They look at your colon, of course, and if they see nothing, it's completely normal. You don't have your next colonoscopy for 10 years. If they start to see polyps in your colon, which are a precursor for colon cancer, they want to see you in 5 years. That's the risk stratification. You've now increased the surveillance rate. If you have a polyp and they take biopsies of these that has a precancerous lesion, you might have another colonoscopy in 2 years. You see, so that's what we do in medicine. When we do a test, we then separate you, triage you into different categories of you're completely normal without any problems, or you now have an increased risk. So we now have to start doing increased surveillance. So, for example, my recommendation, although you can do EPV starting at 6 weeks, I don't think that's practical at all. There's no good prediction of those sizes to the outcome. It's too long of a period and too many things are happening. The earliest that I would recommend EPV, estimated placental volume, to be done would be starting at 20 weeks at the anatomy scan. That's a logical time because that's a really big ultrasound. Everything is being looked at. It takes just 30 seconds to add EPV to the mix, so why not do it then? What if the placenta is small then? Okay, well, instead of not doing another ultrasound, which happens in some cases, you literally don't have another ultrasound after that. I think minimally you should have one maybe in 4 weeks. Let's just see what's going on with the size of the fetus. Let's say the fetus is in the 50th percentile and their placenta, the fetal placenta, is in, let's say, the fifth percentile. So that's a 10-to-1 ratio of percentiles. That's not good. Okay. There should be a 50th percentile fetus should have a 50th percentile placenta, right? They should be the same no matter what size they are. Here is 50 to 5. Well, that's a bad ratio. So let's check in 4 weeks, okay? We really can't do anything. The only thing you can do possibly at this point is, as the mother who's carrying the pregnancy, drink more fluids, make sure you're not dehydrated. How do you know you're not dehydrated? Make sure your urine is clear, you know? Dark yellow urine as a pregnant patient is not a good idea. That means you're not drinking enough. So drink a lot of fluids, sleep on your left side, don't sleep on your back. Try to increase the flow to the placenta. If you're not taking aspirin, ask the doctor to take some baby aspirin. That helps the blood flow through those vessels that we talked about that are sprinkling the blood into the placenta. So those are some weak things that you can do. I would definitely increase surveillance. And again, maybe things will normalize and be okay. But if the fetus now starts to stop growing, is now the 50th percentile, then the next time the 40th, the next time the 30th, we now know that that small placenta is impacting the growth of that fetus. Now we have to risk stratify even more. You might need to have an ultrasound once a week, twice a week. Maybe in the worst case scenario, admitted to the hospital for continuous monitoring. At some point, it will be safer to be delivered than not. I'm going to reduce obstetrics down to 3 words. Do you think I can do that? Reduce all of obstetrics to 3 words. You think that's
Let's hear it.
possible? Okay. Ready? In or out. That's all of obstetrics. That's obstetrics because that's really the decision point, right? So all I want to do is add to the mix to make that decision, an intelligent decision, is just have all the data available. At some point, the amniotic fluid index, the fluid around the fetus, will start to decrease. Why? The amniotic fluid comes from the urine of the fetus. If there's not enough blood flow to the placenta is too small, the fetus can't urinate, the amniotic fluid index goes down. That's why that's measured. And the other final thing I say to all my patients, and I hate to put this responsibility on a mother, but decreased fetal movement is something to be taken very seriously. Unfortunately, a lot of my patients, when this happens to them, will Google this and they'll say, oh, yeah, it's normal in the third trimester to have decreased fetal movement. Don't worry about it. The baby's running out of room and all this stuff. And then the next day they have a stillbirth. Okay. So that's a significant problem. I say to my patients, especially if they've already had a loss, if you have decreased fetal movement or anything that bothers you in your current pregnancy, don't call anybody. Just go to labor and delivery and say, I had a stillbirth at 37 weeks. The placenta was super small. My baby died because of a small placenta. I'm not feeling him or her move normally. I need to be checked out thoroughly. And don't leave until they've completely evaluated you. The final thing I want to say about all this in terms of responsibility and information is I feel that our profession has not taken up its full responsibility in regards to stillbirth. Every time we fly in an airplane, the first thing the flight attendants do is teach us what to do if the plane crashes. Now, United Airlines and Delta, they have very entertaining videos that sort of talk about this, right? They're fun to watch, et cetera. But really, the message is simple. This is what to do if the plane crashes. Now, the likelihood of a plane crash, speaking about math, is 1 out of 15 million. The likelihood of a stillbirth is 1 out of 175. That's much, 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 much more likely. It's still less than 1% of the time, but it's still much more likely than a plane crash. And doctors, so many of my patients who've had a stillbirth say, no one told me that this was even possible. I had no idea that this could have happened. And I'm thinking to myself, why are we so afraid to at least mention it to our patients? And this is the answer I get. I don't want to scare the 99% of my patients where there'll be no loss. And I understand that, but they do tell us in an airplane that the plane will crash and what to do, right? If the plane crashes, what to do. So I think that we have a responsibility for all pregnant patients to say, look, this is a rare event, but we want to tell you it's a possibility. And these are some of the things that you may experience as a warning sign. And if these happen, please either call us or just come to labor and delivery to be checked out. I think that's a service that we should do for pregnant patients, right? We should tell them that that's a possibility.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard so many times that people didn't even know what a stillbirth was
Let alone a placenta.
or a placenta. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to backtrack just for a moment. You mentioned fetal movement. What are your thoughts on increased fetal movement as a warning sign?
Yeah, so cord accidents occur 20% of the time in stillbirths in the third trimester. And not always, but I'm just guessing maybe 20 to 30% of the time from my personal experience dealing with these patients all the time. One of the things that these mothers experience before the loss is a sudden increase in fetal movement. And I want to be very concrete about it. It's not just increased fetal movement. This is what the mothers say frantic movement. there's like a desperateness about it. The fetus is trying to get out of something. And, the umbilical cord is the placenta is a miracle, the fetus is a miracle, the baby's a miracle. But let's give some credit to the umbilical cord. It's the thing that connects the placenta to the fetus, right? And if the placenta is 100%, necessary, the umbilical cord is 100% necessary. And it's kind of a miracle of engineering. It's three vessels, two arteries that pump blood out of the fetal body into the placenta, one vein returning. And because the fetus is moving all the time, how did nature design an umbilical cord to protect those vessels from compression to make something called Wharton's jelly, this very spongy material that's around the vessels? And it does an excellent job, but nothing is 100%. There can be a fetus if for whatever reason that fetus likes to twist, clockwise over and over and over again, then that umbilical cord gets twisted and twisted and twisted to the point where those vessels can compress. And sometimes the fetus just falls asleep, actually kind of becomes unconscious and sort of unravels itself. Sometimes a part of the umbilical cord can get stuck someplace and it will try to move to fix it. And that frantic motion is a fetus attempting to fix the problem.
It's like a last resort.
Yeah. Yeah. It's desperately trying to save itself. And sometimes, my patients share with me that that's the last time they felt any, fetal movement and there was nothing after that. And it's pretty clear that's obviously the event. So cord accidents are 20% of losses. So definitely it's a cause. It happens. And that's why, and the mothers that tell me these stories, they never were told that this is something that could happen. And they kind of go, wow, look at him moving. This is amazing. They take a video of it. They think it's kind of amazing, but they're not aware that this is actually can be a problem.
There was one more thing that has been on my mind that I wanted to ask you.
Only one?
Only one, yeah. No, about the sciencey part, and then I guess we can move on to like more social and cultural stuff. Um, so in our case, Ellery died at 40 weeks one day due to a small placenta. The placenta has been small for a while. Obviously, we will never know for how long. Could have been from the beginning, whatever. Now, what I'm wondering is, and we'll see what you say if the research has been done. So let's say we saved Ellery at like 39 weeks, and the placenta was small ever since. Was there any mental, physical, genetic development issues that could have been caused by the small placenta?
Hmm. Okay, that's a good question. So the placenta is actually a miracle and it's amazing. And i- this amazing thing about the placenta is one of the problems with people measuring it. And one of the reasons they don't measure it is because even a small placenta can support a large fetus up until the last minute perfectly well.
I mean, ours was 7 pounds 3 ounces. Yeah, she was fully
Yeah,
grown. Yeah.
she was gigantic. So this is what the analogy is like. It's like a car without a gas gauge that has a tank of gas and it does run out of gas. Now, how does the car run a minute before it runs out of gas? Perfectly normally. There's no problem. So when you say, would she have been damaged? No, because that placenta, right up until the end, was completely taking care of her. And in fact, that's why I never use the term placental insufficiency. I don't like that term. Cross that out of your vocabulary. Don't use that term out there. The placenta is super efficient. It is like a little lawnmower engine driving a big 18-wheeler truck. That's crazy. That's what it's like. How's that little engine getting that truck going? Right? That's really what's going on here. And so the problem is that can go on for a certain length of time. But if you also start putting some logs in the back of that truck, and have the truck go up a hill, well, that engine just can't do that. It's just not capable of actually running that truck anymore. And it just stops. It just literally melts or something. And that's what happens to the placenta. So it basically gets carried on normal function, normal function, normal function, and then it reaches a cliff and it crashes almost immediately. And this is why so many of my patients who have stillbirths because of small placentas have a normal non-stress test, which is electronic fetal monitoring, the day before, the morning of. At that point, the fetus is fine, right? It is not suffering, it is not damaged. So it kind of is even more painful in a way to think that if, yes, your daughter was delivered a day, even a day before, probably would have
Yep.
been fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, all the more reason to fight even more for what we're trying to do this year, because knowing that she could have been fine, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I have been going, this is kind of a tangent, but I have been going to every marathon location we travel to for this campaign. I've been going to OB clinics and asking to talk with people. And the last one I sat down and talked with their ultrasound person, and she was very interested in estimated placenta volume. She had never heard of it. She didn't know that the placenta could be measured. She was like, it makes so much sense. But then the ultimate pushback at the end is like the providers will come back and say, well, ACOG doesn't recommend it, or, that puts me at a liability if I do something that's not against the standard of care. It's like
Yeah.
frustrating to hear these people. They're like, yeah, that makes so much sense, but we're not going to do it.
I'm very frustrated with this also. And we and my patients who make up most of the members of Measure the Placenta, right? The website measuretheplacenta.org was started by one of my patients, Ann O'Neill. It is most of the people are my patients. They've recruited them. Every time I have a patient with a small placenta, I say, if you want to do advocacy group, this is a group that you should be part of. And they have had a letter writing campaign to ACOG. They visited those people all the time. They said, why don't you do it? Well, there's no study to prove that it works. Well, what would you do? What would the study look like? Tell us the design of the study. Oh, we can't do that. We can't tell you the design of the study, but there has to be a study. There has to be a study, which is what I said at the beginning of this conversation. We do have a study planned. It hasn't been started yet because we don't have the funding to pay for the person to do the ultrasound. So I'm hoping that somebody will step up to the plate and actually help us with the funding to find a person, a sonographer dedicated to this. We actually have the ultrasound machine donated to us at this point. We have the study approved at Yale for the Institutional Review Board. The head of maternal fetal medicine has approved it. So all the approvals have happened. We're just waiting. We do have 10,000 patients a year that we could be, doing scans on. We have 5,000 deliveries a year that we could follow up on the patients. So we have all the resources we need except for the funding to pay for the sonographer. And hopefully, and that would be a 1 to 2 year study, hopefully that study, which is a little painful to me, as I said at the beginning, because we would blindly do this. This will be a double-blinded study where we would collect the data but not do anything, not even inform the patient or the doctors that this is a possibility, that a loss could happen. We would just they would have to sign a consent saying they would allow us to do the ultrasound, but that's all. Only at the end would we open up all the data and look back and say, okay, let's look at the stillbirths. How many of them had small placentas? Let's look at the small placentas. What happened to them? And stillbirth, you sort of alluded to this before, Celeste, is that isn't the only bad outcome you can have in a pregnancy. That's, of course, a terrible outcome. I would say, in my view, the worst outcome you can have in a pregnancy is a maternal death. That is horrible. Having a maternal death, a fetal death, and then a complication, okay, is the order of things. But there are seriously damaged fetuses that have, complications and have to go to the neonatal intensive care unit because of a variety of problems, including things caused by a small placenta. So our study is designed to follow up on all these things, what happens to all these pregnancies, and then to be able to correlate it with the size of the placenta. And not only the size of the placenta itself, but as I've said over and over again, this ratio of the fetal birth weight percentile to the placenta percentile, that's really the critical number. So we're just waiting to do this study and hopefully collect enough data to go to ACOG to tell them that now there's data to support us doing EPV. I would just say if this was a frontal lobe biopsy on a fetus, if this was a dangerous procedure like a liver biopsy that we had to do to kind of answer a question, then I could see it being difficult to get this to be done. But this takes 30 seconds, is done by a simple external ultrasound that's already being done on patients, right? So we're not adding anything really. We're adding a teeny bit of work here just to add this data point. I don't understand the difficulty of it, but in sympathy to the OBs who take care of patients, it's a very litigious environment for them. And if they do things that are not in the standard of care, it is correct. They do put themselves at risk. So I sympathize with them. And that is why we're going to do the study to collect the data that hopefully will change things.
Another frustrating aspect of our care is after the stillbirth, we had a placental pathology report done. It had the weight of Ellery's placenta on there. No one ever said anything to us about the fact that it was too small. It was actually something that I realized reading your research about small placentas, and I was like, "Whoa, what is a small placenta really? Like, what's the weight?" So then I kinda went back and looked, and I was like, "Oh, her placenta was way too small." I remember I called him at work, I was like, I know the cause of death,"
Yeah,
you know?
I remember the call.
And I tried to talk to our care team, and they just no, they, like, had scheduled me at one point, then canceled it, but ultimately, they still just told us, "Unfortunately, we don't know the cause of your daughter's stillbirth." And so many parents, I feel like, get that explanation. They're like, "This just happens." But that is why do you think people are told that so often?
Ignorance. I
Straightforward.
mean, I can't brush it over any other way. So I, in the moments that, you were talking, I pulled up your records because I didn't have it in front of me before. But if you're okay, I'll share some of these numbers with the people listening, which is
Yes.
just astounding to me. Um, so you were 40 weeks and 1 day. Your daughter's placenta was at the 0.0199. Let's, average that out. That was 0.02. Okay, we'll call it that. Not the first percentile, not the 0.1 percentile, but the 0.02 percentile. Now, her percentile was the 35th percentile. So she was at the 35th percentile. Her placenta was at the 0.02 percentile. It's not that she needed to be at the 50th percentile. That's a perfectly good percentile she was at. It's that her placenta needed to be at the same percentile. So she was at the 35th. Her placenta should have been at the 35th. So the way that we measure that is the ratio of the percentiles. Normal is 1 to 1, 50 to 50, 25 to 25, 10 to 10, 90 to 90. Hers was, you ready? 1,757 to 1. 1,757 to 1. That is ridiculous. This is how unbelievably miraculously efficient her placenta was, right? Her placenta had nothing wrong with it except that it was teeny. It was, I said an analogy of a lawnmower engine. It's smaller than that. It's like those little engines that you have on, those model airplanes, that you sort of fly around. Like that engine with an 18-wheeler truck. That's how absurd this was. And it's just so sad because it would have been so obvious that this placenta was so small. We didn't have to wait to 40 weeks in 1 day. Remember, in and out is obstetrics. At 39 weeks, every OB would accept a delivery at 39 weeks, no problem. So if you had had that measurement a week before, it would have been perfectly fine to deliver you then, and she would have been fine. So it's just such a sad case. So I forget exactly the question that relates to this, but why? Oh, okay, this is what bothers me. This is so obviously the reason for the loss that it's ignorance. It's egregious ignorance to not know that this is the cause. Like, how can you not know this? Right? I mean, how can you be in obstetrics and not know that the placenta is the number 100% supporter of the fetus? And when you have a placenta that's so small that that's a very serious problem. Anne O'Neill, and she said this in public, so I feel comfortable repeating this. When she came to me and she lost her son Elijah on July 2nd of 2018, she was on her due date when she lost him. Okay, very similar to you. Um, had just the slightest decreased fetal movement that morning, but really didn't know what it was. It's her fourth pregnancy. She had no real reason to even know what that was, but she was suspicious that something was wrong. She went to the hospital and she had already lost him. And she is a PhD. She's a scientist. She refused to just be told these things happen. So she actually, after the pathology report and the autopsy was done, she met with the pathologist. Pathologists are not comfortable usually talking to people, and this one wasn't either. And he said, well, we don't really know, but the placentas, yes, it is kind of small. And after she met me and I said it was extremely small, she went back to him and said, well, this seems to be the reason. And he said, well, that placenta, you're right, is so small that I don't believe that it belongs to your son. I think we must have mixed up the placentas because he himself didn't think you could have such a small placenta with an 80th. He was in the 80th percentile. Okay. And his placenta was less than a third percentile. That's the mix there. So literally, they would prefer to think that somebody mixed up the placenta than to acknowledge that this could be the reason for the loss. So Anne was quite upset. I said, well, Anne, the only way we're going to be able to answer this is to do genetics of you and the placenta, which I happen to have in my lab. So she sent me a blood sample. We did genetics on her son's placenta and her and proved that that was her son. So it's like, this is the extent that we had to go because people are so reluctant to accept that this is even a possibility. They don't even think it's a possibility. So why would they test for it? Why would they add it to clinical care? I mean, that's how absurd the situation is. And that's why we still have, I calculate about 7,000 babies a year die because of small placentas, right? There are about 21 to 23,000 stillbirths a year. A third of them are due to small placentas. So as long as we're not doing EPV, we still continue to lose 7,000 babies a year due to this problem.
I mean, even saving a tenth of them, it's 700 babies.
Yeah.
By doing EPV and maybe just trying, even if we don't do a good job, every baby saved is a family less
Yeah.
in a loss that we.
I think it's even more insidious, just based on what we just said. People don't even realize that the placenta has something to do with this, right? If you don't even think the placenta is involved, if you don't think about the placenta, if you take it for granted, if you don't even realize that a small placenta can be the cause of a loss, why would you measure the placenta? I mean, it's not even on your radar, as it were, right? It's not even part of the repertoire. It's not in the toolbox. So of course you don't do EPV because you don't even think the placenta plays a role. I don't know what they think, that there's this magic thing that's happening called the placenta that we don't have to think about, that magically does what it's supposed to do. I mean, really, I don't understand.
So I'm not sure if you know about other countries, but so knowing the US is ranking, I mean, it's even off the chart. It's 140,
It's
180
183rd
out of
out of
195
195.
countries. So I mean, it's in the 0.01 percentile, let's put it there. So what are other countries doing different in terms of prevention for stillbirth compared to the US?
I have colleagues around the world, and Norway is, I think, a really good model country. Their stillbirth rate is so low. Ours, on average, is 6 per thousand, with quite a bit of racial disparity, so that whites are 4 per thousand and blacks are 12 per thousand. So 3 times the rate. I mean, there's institutional racism here. That's part of the reason we have such a bad rate in this country. But in Norway, it's 2 per thousand. So that's on average. And why is it so low? It's because they are so aggressive with prenatal care. It is mandated and they're seen so often and they're tested so often and tested with so many different tests. Ironically, I do research with colleagues in Norway, and we have shown, because they have the best data for pregnancy outcomes in that country, they measure the weight of every placenta. They measure the weight of every baby. They have normative curves for male and female placentas and male and female babies, so we can really do a lot of data. We have a study of over 1 million patients, and we've shown that ratio that your daughter had that I said was, let's see, 1,756, like that's crazy. If you just go to 10 to 1, you're 4 times more likely to have a stillbirth. Just even 10 to 1, you're 4 times more likely. So as you get that number gets bigger and bigger, obviously the likelihood of stillbirth increases and increases. But the reason it's a problem to do the study in Norway is they have so few stillbirths. Now, I'm glad for them, but it actually makes it really hard to do the study, right? There are actually so few patients who have small placentas that can be measured because they catch them all and they save them all. Now, they don't use EPV, so it's, again, this is not to say that EPV is invaluable. It's just that they're so aggressive with everything else. Now, I personally think that even in that country, EPV would be beneficial because just like the pilot that we talked about before, it's just another piece of data in the toolbox. Why not have more information? It can't hurt to have more information, right? I'm not saying that we're going to force you to make a decision based on that, but at least add it to your calculation of what you're thinking about. And just to go to your daughter, I mean, I'm looking at these numbers and it's just astounding. How could anybody look at those numbers a day before you lost her and not say there's a potential danger here? A disaster in the making, which we know what happened, right? Like there's nobody, even with the limited data that we have on placental size, people would say that's astoundingly small. This is probably not safe, even though she seems to be okay right now. Let's just deliver you since you're already 40 weeks, right? This is the day before the event. So, yeah, there's no question in my mind that that's what should have happened for you. And it would have happened if somebody knew that her placenta was so small.
If a generous person wants to donate and they donate $10,000, because I guess with less than that these days you can't do much. So 10,000, 100,000, a million. Based on what you said earlier, you already have a study in the making, but based on those three numbers, what degree of study, of outreach, of care do you think would be possible if you would receive 10,000, 100,000, and a million?
Well, if anybody was willing to give 10,000, I'd be very grateful. That would be wonderful, but that would not really allow us to do any studies. 100,000 would actually allow us to do a study, and that would be fantastic, and that would be extremely appreciated, and it would get it on the map at least in terms of some data for EPV. I actually, not that I would turn down $1 million, but I don't think it's necessary at this point. And what I'd rather do, my own personal view of this, I'd rather do the $100,000 to $200,000 study range to actually validate that estimated placental volume has the potential to prevent stillbirth, to satisfy American College of OBGYN, to satisfy all the doctors who are skeptical about this, to at least say, look, in this study, blinded, double-blinded study, prospective, we followed, X number of thousand patients. We saw these outcomes, and this is what EPV showed in these different outcomes. Therefore, EPV should be added to, prenatal care. If anybody wanted to do a larger study, multi-center study, then at that point, yes, NIH funds things at $1 million to $3 million, and then you might consider doing a multi-center study where you actually look at multiple centers, and then you start using different kind of ultrasound devices, and then you start looking at different times, the best time to intervene, and things like that. But I think we need to get something on the map to begin with, so. I don't know if we'll be lucky enough to have somebody listening to this who will say, 100,000, I could do that, and I'm willing to do it. And, and that would at least really start things off. So that would be a wonderful first step.
Could be a group effort.
Indeed, indeed.
Shouldn't be one person necessarily.
Well, just to wrap things up, for someone who has experienced a pregnancy loss, what is one takeaway or message that you would want them to hear?
So the thing that I say over and over again to especially the mothers who've had a pregnancy loss is it's not your fault. You're not an OB. You don't have an ultrasound machine at home. The doctors you work with don't even appreciate the things we just talked about. So how can this be your fault? So that is one of the things that I think is one of my most important responsibilities in dealing with my patients is to remind, again, not to minimize the father and to say the father doesn't have emotional, impact from the loss. Of course, it's very difficult for them. But I think it's unique for a woman who is carrying a pregnancy to have a life inside of her and to lose that life. There is an implicit, automatic um, identification that I'm already their mother and my job is to take care of them. And I get that. But I need to implore you, Celeste, personally, and any mother listening to this who's had a loss, to know that it's not your fault and it's no one had educated you about this possibility. No one gave you the tools to respond. We didn't do what the airlines do in terms of warning about flights. We didn't do that for you, and we don't do that for almost all my patients. So how can it be your fault? So it's a horrible tragedy. You'll never forget this for the rest of your life. This will be with you for your entire life. I understand that, but you need to try to forgive yourself for responsibility for this because you just are not responsible for this loss.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here this afternoon, talking with us, answering all our questions. The work that you're doing is absolutely incredible and inspirational.
Even the bespokenness, just the willingness to talk openly and as generously as you do. It's so because many doctors and many research scientists are very timid, quiet people in the lab. You're the complete opposite.
It's my honor to try to help families who've had losses, and I'm doing everything I can to try to prevent the 7,000 and more losses a year that happen in our country. So good luck on your journey, and I hope that we all can improve things together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.